So hello everyone, welcome. We're all waving. Hi. And cyberspace as well. It's mixed feelings I have because people once had to come to the class to be here, and now they don't have to. So I never know who's going to show up, but I know that there's, thank God, a few thousand people watching it, so that's good. But as a result, I don't get to have the human contact element. So I guess everything you get something, everything you got to give for everything you take, right? There's a price for everything. Okay, so welcome. My name is Jacobson, and I have been leading this, what shall we call it? This interaction since 1982, if you can believe that. It's a long time ago, before you were born, right? Okay. For all of you must have been born. You all look so young and vibrant. Not you? Okay. And as I mention often, to me, everything has to have an objective and a need, to fill a need. When I was a younger man, I grew up in a traditional Jewish home, in a Hasidic home, and my challenges were not unlike probably most young people's challenges, especially trying to look for meaning in life and finding out why we're here, the big existential and transcendental questions, and especially coming from a Jewish world, which an intense yeshiva education, which goes back thousands of years, Judaism. So it's particularly intriguing, but also challenging, because I saw so much of what so many of us witness today, and that is how shall we put it, the dissonance and even the compartmentalization between what people preach and what people do. And so it's one thing if a person does not claim to be following a divine plan, so then they have the excuse that they don't really have a plan. But someone that claims to be teaching or perpetuating a divine design, which is what Judaism teaches in the Torah, and then you see a lot of things that are inconsistent with that, and people not necessarily living up to the highest standards, and it's more cultural, sometimes we can call mechanical Judaism, people going by rote instead of something that's really coming from the heart and soul. So I had my challenges as I looked at all of that and witnessed it. So make a long story short, I went through my own spiritual crisis, if you wish. It was really more internal. It wasn't so apparent. Thank God it wasn't a traumatic one. And it wasn't involving abuse or violation or lack of trust. It was really more of an internal, introspective experience to understand what it means to be Jewish. Is all this some type of mind control game, or is there something real to it? And finally, what really resonated and touched me deeply were the mystical and Kabbalistic and esoteric teachings, where there I was able to hear the music, so to speak, of Judaism, the universal music, because that was another thing that was very disturbing to me, which was the parochialism, and in a way the almost like a political parochialism of Judaism. And if God indeed created the universe and created all 7 billion people, then God's plan has to really encompass everybody. It's not taking away necessarily from the uniqueness of the Jew, but a lot of Jewish culture really sees the non-Jewish world as a threat or an enemy. And it's understandable, because through much of our history that's how we've been treated. So it's understandable we developed a lot of defensiveness. But it was hard for me to imagine that Abraham and Moses were not universal thinkers, because the teachings, especially the spiritual teachings, all are about how a soul tries to cope and tries to thrive in a difficult, hostile world. This is a very universal challenge that all of us have. There's no one that's immune from this challenge. And we all cry the same tears, and we all smiles, and we all need love, and we all want to love our children and be nurtured and nurture others. So all these elements often get swept under the carpet when you're dealing with a very intense academic Jewish education, because the focus there is a lot more on knowledge, and especially on the Talmudic knowledge, which is a lot very legal and technical, and that alone, to me, was lacking. And then when I discovered what the Zohar says, the Zohar is the classic work of Jewish mysticism, that there's a body to Torah and there's a soul to Torah, then I understood, immediately clicked. Of course, if you only study the body, that would be like looking at how a machine works and not understand what the soul of this machine is. You're missing half the story, if not more. And always this parable that comes to mind that always resonated with me as well was with the nightingale. That when God created the nightingale, which has a beautiful voice, the bird. So the nightingale came to God and said, "Now thank you for giving me such an eloquent voice, but I need you to also provide me with something to protect myself from enemies, from predators. Because I may be perched on a branch one dusk and serenading into the night, and a predator, someone hungry for dinner, will be attracted to me, to my voice, and have me for dinner, a piece of meat. So please, God, give me something to protect myself from predators." So God offered the bird a beak, a sharp beak. A sharp beak is like a razor-sharp beak, which is a form of protection. The bird inspected the merchandise and said, "No, it's not becoming for a elegant bird like me to have such a nose." Fine. So then God offered the bird a set of sharp claws. Claws are yet another form of defense that some creatures have. And again, the bird rejected it for the same reason, not befitting. So finally, God offered the bird a set of wings. And the bird never saw wings before, looked at the wings and said, "I don't understand. You're the master of you're the creator of the universe, the master of the universe, created the world with such a design. And I have enough body weight to carry. You give me 2 extra pieces of flesh that'll just weigh me down further, make it harder for me to escape my enemies." So God, of course, said, "No, little bird. These are called wings." In Hebrew, wings are knafayim. Wings. And when you learn to use these wings, they'll help you soar and fly to places that no enemy could ever touch you. So what's powerful about this parable is the same is true with any discipline. If, for example, if you ever took piano lessons, or any instrument for that matter, or if you don't know how to read music, you look at music sheets, and it's a bunch of gibberish, squiggles, that make no sense. Why would you even try to read that? Then you see somebody sit down at an instrument and start playing, and it's magic. Why? Because when you look at the squiggles, you're just looking at the outer surface, so just the gibberish. But there's a soul to the language. It's called music. So it's true, Judaism is filled with demands and regulation about almost everything, not almost everything, literally, from how we wake up to how you go to sleep, how we're born, how we die, how we love, sexuality. Just take the laws of Passover, and that's enough to drive somebody OCD. The details and so on. And in all of it can seem to be a lot of extra body weight. Why the need for so many obligations and responsibilities? But then, when you suddenly discover the music, you discover the soul within it, it suddenly turns from weight into wings. And wings help you fly to places you can never reach. So many of us have disciplines that were taught to us, whatever they may be, cultural ones, social ones, religious ones. And most of these disciplines just seem to be rules and conventions that don't necessarily make sense. But if you want to fit in, that's what you have to follow. And if not, you'll be somewhat blacklisted, if not worse. You know, the silent rules of any social standard. And as such, what it really does is it causes us to conform, or else, and thus repress our own inner feelings and our own individuality. Who does not struggle with their individuality in a world like ours? With all the technology, with all so-called freedoms, all these technologies could also enslave you. Let's be honest. So we are all struggling to discover our individuality in a world that puts many demands on us, whether it's the workplace, whether it's the home, whether it's our faith and religion and our communities, whether it's our parents, our schools, we all grow up with demands. And often those demands cause our own individual identity to go undercover. So now we are here adults sitting here, and you have to ask yourself the question, so who am I? Are you really an independent individual? Are you a product? I don't want to say victim of circumstances, which means by the time we are of age where we can make choices, so to speak, most of the choices have been made for us. What school you went to, where you grew up, what influences you were exposed to. We didn't choose any of that. And in those formative years, it's all been etched into our psyches. So it's no wonder that when you start asking, someone says to you, so do you know who you really are? Many people, you ask them, who are you? They give you their business card, because that's the easiest way to identify. But your business card is barely what you do, let alone who you are. So the answer to the question, who am I, is not so simple. However, the part of the journey where we have intelligence, we were given minds and hearts, and when we are given the courage and we're nurtured and validated to explore and to evaluate and to use our free inquiry to challenge even and question, everything fine? Then we can somewhat free ourselves from the bonds of the social, familial, and cultural rules that don't often allow us to really breathe. So in a way, I could say this class has emerged as that objective of looking into Jewish thought, but with the universal eyes, and through that lens, to discover transcendence in our lives. So there are many Torah classes out there. Some teach Bible and commentaries, some teach Tanakh, some teach Talmud, Jewish law, history, philosophy, and many good classes. I try to stoke, my focus here is mostly to the operative word being relevance. Where's the relevance, the personal, psychological, and emotional relevance in the ideas that we are discussing? So I tried to take either a theme or an idea from a chapter in the Torah, and or from the holidays or the time in which we're in, and try to derive the universal lesson in that personal fashion of, as I said, psychological, emotional, spiritual lessons in our personal lives. So tonight, this class we titled, the exact title is, how many things in your life are eternal? Something like that. Is that right?
How many eternal things occupy your life?
Okay, there you go. More precise. How many eternal things occupy your life? I actually wrote the title, but so I have the liberty to play with it. And the reason I thought about it was because we are, of course, creatures of habit. Many of us don't even step back to think about it. But if you do step back to think about your daily activities, today, for example, today, or yesterday, day before, how many of these activities are we even conscious of? Because once they become habits and patterns and routines in our lives, they become really brainless in a sense. They're just the thing you do. It's what you do. So it's not like every morning we make an active choice of most of the things we're going to be doing. Most of them are part of our regimen. Regimen meaning either responsibilities or obligations or things we've committed to do. And therefore what happens is that just takes over and that becomes the driving force. But when you step back and say, okay, so what is it that I'm involved in? And am I even happy with the things I'm involved in? That's not something we usually do unless there's a crisis. Something goes wrong. You lose your job. God forbid there's a loss. There's some other shakeup. So then you're forced to go back and look at your so-called security blankets and what it is that defines your life. But it's a healthy thing to not wait for a crisis, but to step back in time to time and look at exactly that. What are we occupied with? What preoccupies our time and our lives? What are we consumed with? And that leads us, of course, to the bigger question is, how many of those things, as the title of this class is, have eternal impact? And how many of them are simply short-lived, temporary, transient experiences simply to get by, the here and now? And you'd be shocked to discover how much of our lives are not connected to anything that's lasting. It's mostly connected to instant gratification on one end, or other temporary things that are simply there as part of what we call life's duties or life's activities. And this includes the food we eat, the shopping we do, the grooming. They all maybe make us feel good, and they're all not necessarily bad things, but they're not necessarily eternal things. And if you think about it further, you ask yourself the question, does that make sense? If someone were to come to you right now and said, you have two options: to do something that will last a day, a week, a month, or to do something that will last forever. Is anyone in their right mind that would choose the first? Nobody. Because, first of all, simple logic dictates if I'm going to spend an hour doing something, that investment is far greater. I'm sorry, that investment is far more worth it if its results are forever, or at least long term, than if the results are short term. That's like the basic rule of all. You can call it even technology. Once upon a time, we needed to work 8 hours a day in toil in a field in order to produce a pound or several pounds of potatoes to be able to eat dinner. So essentially, you put more work in than the result, than what the fruit that it yielded. Today, because of technology, you can press a button and just a matter of seconds get something in return that would have taken years ago, years and years to be able to gain. So that's what technology is. The question then is, what is left with our free time? What do we do with it? So the interesting thing is we end up just using it for other temporary things. It's not like we dedicate it towards something that is more impactful and longer term impact. You know that joke they tell about the guy who, in a small town, who would every morning after his morning activities, he would sit down by the edge of the water and go fishing. And he loved to fish. He was a fisherman. He loved to fish. He would sit at the edge of the river, and one day, and he would come up with his catch. He had a very serene, relaxed life. So one day, somebody's visiting the town, a businessman, an entrepreneur, and sees this guy fishing. And he sees that he's very skilled and very good at it, and he knows how to catch the fish and the right fish and all that. So he decides, business opportunity. He goes over to him and he says, you know something, I see what you're doing, and I see you doing it very well, it's very skilled. Why don't we become partners? I'll pay for getting a boat, and we'll go out into the deeper waters, and let's catch even more fish, that we can sell some of them, and we'll divide the profits. Okay, the guy says, okay, interesting. And what happens then? He says, well, once we make some profits, we buy a fleet of boats, and we train some other people in your skills so that we catch even more fish. And therefore, then we can then go and sell more. And so on. And then what, he says? Then at some point, we won't even have to go out to the water. We'll just have these people do the work. We'll pay them for their efforts. And then we'll just we'll just collect the profits. And then what? He says, then we'll become wealthy. He says, and then what? He says, we'll become wealthy. He says, then we'll retire and we'll go fishing. He says, but I'm fishing already. Why do I need to go this whole process? So this is sometimes what they say is the cycle of life, that, you spend half your life making money, or like one Romanian baker once told me, he said you spend half your life making the money and half your life spending it on doctors. Now, some of these cycles are somewhat odd, but that's life. Why is this possible? Why are these absurdities possible? Because we are in some way trapped in the moment. And whatever that moment offers us is the thing that's most compelling. I was at a Torah science conference a few months ago, Hanukkah time actually, December, in Florida. And And there was a cardiologist, head of cardiology actually at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital here in New York. He gave a very interesting talk. And one of these things he was saying was how he derives from Jewish thought and Torah, methodologies that he uses in his practice. He says one of the biggest challenges is not the actual diagnosis of heart disease or heart conditions or building a healthy heart, but it's the discipline that's necessary to do so. So you have a patient come to you, he says, and you see that they're in trouble, their hearts are not in good shape. You give them a series of exercises and diets and so on. And at the moment, everybody, of course, wants to have a healthy heart. Whatever the motivation, to live longer, to be there at their children's or grandchildren's weddings. And everyone's got their motivations. And everybody's motivated. And he says, but the fact is, statistics show, all the inspiration that happens in the doctor's office will wane within a few days. And people do not keep up with these disciplines. She says one of the biggest challenges, if anyone is even better than discovering any type of new ways to fight heart disease, is figuring out how do you counter this human tendency of not living up to the things that you know in your mind are what you should be doing. Now we all have this issue. It's called like the New Year resolution syndrome, where the resolutions last an hour maybe, a day, not much more. And then of course just look at the bestseller list. Every book keeps telling you, here's how you're going to get happiness. Now they keep being bestsellers. That means they're not working, because if they worked, there wouldn't be new books necessary on the topic, right? So we're strange creatures, and life is absurd in many ways. But I want to analyze this a little deeper and further, because what he came away with, that cardiologist, his name was Dr. Rosner, not Rosner, with an R or something, I forgot the name. Anyway, he came away with one of the things that he discovered studying Torah, he said, was the idea that we do have a Yetzer Hara, it's called. We do have an evil inclination. We have a voice inside of us that does everything possible to cause us to behave destructively, basically. So it's not some just natural dissipation of inspiration. There's actually an active force inside of us that is arguing the case to ignore your long-term good for your short-term gains. And he gave it was a very interesting thing. One of the statistics that was very interesting was how human beings, if they have two choices in front of them, they will choose the short-term gain over long-term benefits. Now, it's not logical, because no one in their right mind would ever say that. To do something right now that's destructive but makes you feel good, and something else that may not be so pleasurable but great long-term benefits, I mean, the mind would tell you that you definitely follow the long-term. However, to cite the words from the Tanya, there's more than the mind, there's also a heart. And the heart is impulsive. And its impulsive nature is such that when it sees something, it gets seduced and gets driven and affected by our sensory stimulation. And this is not even up for debate. You see it all the time. You see it all the time. You see it in the context, for example, if suddenly in this room walked in a celebrity, I don't think there's a person in the room, including myself, that would not look their way. Everybody else we'd probably ignore. Why? Because there's something about celebrityhood, the visual, something that even the most profound of us are affected by superficial things like that. The question is, why is that the case? To say yes, that we have an impulsive heart, that definitely clarifies, because if we were just minds, a computer, for example, a machine, is not affected by emotions. There are no feelings. So a machine will do only what it's programmed to do. It won't suddenly go off track. It won't go over the reservation and off the beaten path, off its plan, because this is what it was programmed to do. However, since we have hearts that are far less predictable and far more impulsive, driven by impulse, that is what creates a whole different illusion almost. That right now, something there for you that looks appealing is going to be very attractive. You still can use your mind to discipline yourself and stop yourself. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's an effort, and it's a battle actually. So that's number one that we need to know about ourselves. And never underestimate that power of the impulsive heart. It's always there. Okay. The number two, which goes even deeper, is what the mystics and especially the Hasidic masters, when they discuss this, they discuss the idea of why is it possible that a human being can do things that are destructive to themselves, where their mind tells them one thing and their impulses tell another, and you'll follow your impulse. Even while you're doing it, you may know that this is not the right way to be, but you'll still do it. And even if you got burned, you'll do it again. What do they tell that story in healing? In the healing world, they have this parable analogy of a guy lived his life, total self-indulgent life. Like the portrait of Dorian Gray type of person. And, pushed off all the consequences and all the long-term results. Finally, because this day comes and he passes on and moves on to the heavenly court, and now he has to stand before God and the court to stand in judgment and be accountable for his hedonistic and selfish, narcissistic life. Hedonistic. And of course he has nothing to really say because he had no defense. He was an intelligent man, made his choices. Okay, so his calculation was, I had fun while it lasted. Now, time of reckoning has come. But of course the court, after all the presentations, deliberates. So he goes out into the heavenly court yard and is ruminating and depressed over his predicament. And of course, who comes over to him, they call the angel of darkness. Some call it the devil, Lucifer, whatever, all the different names that you have for it. So the angel of darkness says, why are you so disturbed, young man? I don't know if a young man or old man, whatever he was at that point. He says, I lived a very indulgent life. I had fun while it lasted. But now the day has come and it's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be pretty. So the angel of darkness says, there's always hope. I have a deal for you. Okay, in exchange for your soul, soul exchange. In exchange for your soul, I will give you the opportunity to go back into the world and relive your life. And relive it any way you like. So you can relive it and redo the whole thing. The guy was a shrewd man, so he says to the Prince of Darkness, he says, very nice idea, but I'll go back, I won't remember this moment, so I'll just do everything the same way again. I'll make this deal with you if you give me most of my memory. I'll remember that life I lived and the consequences and our deal that we've made here. So I don't go back with a clean slate and just do everything the same way again. Prince of Darkness says, no problem. Whatever you want, just sign here on the dotted line. He signs, he gives away his soul, and the next thing he knows, he's back on earth reliving his life. And the court, of course, was adjourned. He's giving his new opportunity. Okay, what do you think happens? He remembers everything, and he remembers his life, and he remembers the consequences, and he remembers his conversation, and knows that there's a day, and he does exactly the same thing again. This is one of the parables they share when people start some real rehab programs, alcoholism or drug addiction or other addictions, to tell you how powerful the temptation is, that even if you know everything, he thought he was a smart aleck, that if he remembers, he won't do it again. The Prince of Darkness was one step ahead of him and knows, I've seen guys like you already. You can know everything and you'll do the same thing again. I had a friend, he used to come to this class, and then he's still around. He had a real big scare, really almost like a life and death, not almost, he was literally on his deathbed. I went to visit him. And he, interesting guy, very soulful person, but also has his, let's put it this way, his share of temptations. And he used to always talk to me about it and laugh about it. That on one hand he knows better, but on the other hand he can't get away from his life of fun. I remember even years ago he said to me, you're not going to be seeing me so often. He used to come every week. He says, because you're making my life miserable. I have to think about my conscience and about my goals and my bigger mission in life. I'm still a young guy, and I'm not, this is too serious for me. He said it actually in a very endearing way. And he says, so I'm not going to be coming around so often. Precisely because I don't, I have a few more years of fun. When I get a little older, more serious, you'll see me. Anyway, he did come back pretty 6 months later. And when he came back, I didn't say his name. I said, there's a man sitting here today that I have to say gave me the biggest compliment. I was making him miserable. Such misery is great, As they say, making happy people miserable and miserable people happy. That would be a nice calling card. Anyway, he got sick. It was literally on his deathbed. The doctors gave up hope. And he says to me, something, I really regret a lot of what I've done in my life. And if God gives me a lease on life, I will this time not do it the same way. Almost the same story, except he didn't die. So, and I smiled to myself, and I said, I'm sure if you made that commitment and a deal with God, I'm sure God is listening. And actually, he did survive. Not only survived, he came out of it completely. And a few months later, we're talking, and I said, so what's happening? I knew what's happening, but I wanted him to tell me. He said, I don't know, there's something about us human beings that's very weird. I remember exactly what I told you. And then when you're back into the saddle and you're back in so you think you're in control again, you go right back to where you were. So this is it's absurd, as I said before, but it's a part of our reality. The questions that the mystics ask, how is this possible? Yes, it's true the impulsive heart is powerful and so on, but how is it possible? So they introduce the Arizal. Isaac Luria was a great mystic, maybe the greatest of them all, lived in Tzfat at the end of his life. And it was a short life, actually. He passed away at the age of 38. And he became known as the great Arizal, which is short for Omer Rabbi Yitzchak. Yitzchak was his name, Isaac Luria. And among the revolutions that he introduced in Kabbalistic thought, obviously, let me just qualify, when I say revolution, doesn't mean that it wasn't said before, but before what may not have been understood. And he was able to so-called understand a deeper concept. It's called, I speak about it often here, the tzimtzum, the doctrine of tzimtzum. Or in the words used in Kabbalah, the Soid HaTzimtzum, the secret of tzimtzum. What is this tzimtzum? Tzimtzum is a concept, a conceptual, we'll call it a conceptual black hole. It comes to answer a fundamental question, and that is, if the divine is omnipresent and omnipotent, so how is it possible that we exist with the perception that we are self-independent individuals? The divine consciousness should subsume all of us and all our abilities to be independent. We're not just talking about the question of free will, we're talking about just even existence. The mere fact, if you were in the presence of the sun, you'd be completely consumed by sunlight. We would not be able to exist. We'd get burned up by the power of sunlight. And that's just a creature, the sunlight, another created entity. How much more so a divine presence? Another way to put the question is this: if there is truly an integral and integral unity that connects us all, and what we see as separate entities are really just our myopic vision, where we don't see the real underlying unity with things, which modern physics will testify to that, then how is it possible that we actually can hurt each other? And the concept of human injustice and hatred and divisiveness and war, to the point of actually killing each other, if we're really all part of one large organism. So, and many other such theological quandaries. So the Arizal, before him, different Kabbalists and different thinkers had different ways of explaining it. But his explanation was that the divine, in the process of creating existence as we know it, went through a process, what he called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means a total withdrawal, or we should say concealment of the divine consciousness, allowing for the room for an independent consciousness to emerge, which is us. So think of it this way. We all know that when you see a glove and a hand, right, the glove is just a garment for the hand inside the glove. What would it sound like, and how absurd would it be if we valued the glove more than the hand? But we do so all the time. We give value to the superficial surface level of reality, and either ignore or don't even acknowledge that there's a hand inside the glove, so to speak. How is that possible? So the tzimtzum is the answer. The answer is it inverted reality. And I'll explain it with a somewhat of a story. So you have the meeting of a philosopher and a mystic. And they're discussing the existence of God. And the philosopher is struggling with knowing the proof. How do we know God exists? The mystic, for him, there's no question. It's a given for him that God exists. And they're debating the issues. He's using his logic, the philosopher. The mystic is trying to explain it. And back and forth, going in circles, going nowhere. Finally, the mystic at the end of it all says to the philosopher, he says, I envy you. Because, to be honest, I think about myself most of the time. I envy you because you think about God all the time. It's very impressive. You think about God. You struggle with the issue of God and so on. And with that, they part ways. The philosopher who respected this mystic thought he was complimented. Only later did he discover, by himself or others helped him discover, that he was actually insulted by the mystic. The mystic was saying, I think about myself all the time, because for the mystic, God is a given. Doesn't have to think about it. It's a given that there's a force that we cannot see that's the essence of all reality. So he struggles and thinks about himself. Do I exist? Do I not exist? Why do I exist? That's the mystic struggle. For the philosopher, there's no question that the philosopher exists. I for sure exist. My question is whether God exists. So he thinks about God all the time. You see the point? So this is not just semantics. It's a question of, today we talk a lot about matter and energy. Today you don't need a belief and faith in the invisible, because everything is invisible, we know, that drives existence. Whether it's the DNA in the human body, or it's the subatomic particles in the rest of the universe. All the technologies we use, they're all invisible forces. Yes, your mobile phone is not invisible, but everything that makes it function is invisible. And even the greatest technicians and the programmers and all the geniuses, they can't see microscopic particles more than we can. They just are familiar with the dynamics, how they work, and how to manipulate them, and how to maneuver, but it's not like they can see it there. So today, the forces that shape existence are completely magnetic. Size does not matter at all, using that cliche. Once upon a time, what was a great army? An empire. The more soldiers, the more firepower, the bigger the machines, the more powerful. Today, that's not at all the case. It has nothing to do with size. It has to do with quality. And matter and energy are reversible. And one strand of hair, when manipulated, can create a nuclear explosion that's more powerful than all the weapons you've ever seen. When harnessed, it's a very positive thing. When not, it could be very destructive. So we don't need today proofs for these type of ideas that these invisible forces are what shape. So someone say, who are you? It's far more your genetic and cellular and DNA structures that shape who you are than anything that's visible to the naked eye. And it's the other way around. The reason you look a certain way, the reason you are a certain way is because of these invisible forces. Now invisible, let me just qualify. You could say invisible means they're not visible to the eye. With certain instruments you can see them. That's not true. When it comes to, especially based on Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and other laws of physics, these are things that are fundamentally unknowable. It's not just we haven't yet found a machine that to see it. There are states that are completely beyond our scope of predictability or determinism and so on. Now, it's not really so relevant to go into all the details of that, but just want to make that point. So with that in mind, but how many of us live on that level? Even though it's energy that defines matter, or using the analogy I gave before, the hand that defines the glove, most of us are consumed with the glove. We're consumed with the outer. Someone insults you, if you don't feel like you belong, these simple, shallow, and superficial realities on the surface level are what define our lives. And very few people say, I live in that deeper energy level. We may know it exists, and we may know that it's a driving force, but that's not where we live. We live on a social surface level where the outer matters. Maybe the most distorted cliche of all is, don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody judges a book by its cover. I'd like you to find someone that doesn't. That's why covers, they spend millions of dollars to design covers. That's why marketing and advertising works, because it's about getting you, manipulating your emotions, for good or for bad, to buy the product. Packaging. A lot of things that we value, if it wasn't the right package, we wouldn't buy it. You know? And I'm not suggesting that every time something has a good package means the product isn't good. But packaging is probably more important than even the product itself, especially initial reaction, our initial reaction to things. So is that because we're shallow people or superficial? Not necessarily. It's because of the tzimtzum, because God created an inverted reality. He made us struggle to look for the inner, and we experience easily the outer. So, we all have experienced this, for example, who hasn't in school or even as adults. You have sometimes someone, and I remember in our class, we had a kid that stuttered. Children that have their own different handicaps. And children could be very cruel to people, even their own friends, and laugh at it, and so on. And we are affected by these outer dimensions. Then you suddenly meet someone who may have a handicap, God forbid, or challenged in some way. And you start talking to them, you find out one of the most beautiful souls you've ever met. And yet we are affected by the outer. As beautiful as that soul may be, and you may love the person, but there's something about outer perception. You may be ashamed even to walk with that person, even though they may be the nicest person on earth. Because their outer people judge things by the cover. That's how it is. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that we're bad people. It doesn't even mean we're shallow people. It means because God made it that way. He made it difficult to see and value the inside. Made it easy for us to value the outside. To put it in simple, very simple terms. And that's how the Rizal explains the tzimtzum. It's inverting reality. It's suddenly saying that the hand is not as significant. Or, I don't see the hand, so the glove is all that matters. And that's how most of us live our, not most of us, I would say every one of us lives our lives. Sensory stimulation of the basically sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell drives more our decisions and than our inner beliefs and our loves and so on. Now that doesn't mean we're doomed, it just means that's our initial reaction. That's why it's very easy to distract someone. That's why it's very easy to seduce someone. And that's why emotions can be so powerful. Because we don't, when the impulse grabs us, when we're seduced by the moment, by the temptation, all logic falls aside. Which is why the Talmud says, a person doesn't sin, or actually to really translate it accurately, sin is not the right word. Avera means no one is displaced. Avera means to move away, to be displaced. If a mitzvah means a connection, and Avera means a disconnection. And I'll explain that in a moment. So he says that the Talmud says, nobody moves away, or so-called, is misaligned from their purpose, unless unless a moment of folly, a moment of insanity entered into your being. To give an example, would any healthy person put their hand in fire and keep it there? Never. Why? Because you're very aware that fire burns your hand. Simple as that. Why would you put your hand in the fire if you're a normal person? Now, the only reason a person would, if you see someone putting their hand in fire, I'm not talking about magic tricks or anything, I'm talking about the normal situation, it's either one of two things. Either they don't know it's fire, or they don't know that fire burns, which could be a young child or something like that. Even they have the instincts for many things, but that's what it is. So that analogy is used also spiritually. We can do things that are destructive to ourselves simply because we don't know it's destructive. If we knew it, we'd never do it. How is that possible? Again, the tzimtzum, that concealment. So the consequences of our behavior are hidden from us. If you saw the consequence of every bad action you do immediately, of course you wouldn't do it. But you don't see it immediately, and you may not even see it in the long term. You're told. So what do you opt for? The immediate pleasure over the long-term concept or the long-term promise or whatever it may be. So that explains why human behavior is so absurd and so weird. That is why, as strange as it sounds, we will choose a temporary and impermanent activity over something that will create something eternal. Because we live in the moment and that's all we see. And no matter what our philosophies and our value systems and ideas teach us, that you're still, the symptoms still affect you, and never ever forget that. So that's the bad news, seemingly, right? The good news is that awareness is half the cure of every problem. Once you're aware of this, and that's why the Arizal taught it, once you're aware of this type of hold that this universe, a material universe, has on us, and that we're addicted to the moment, to the here and now, to the temporary, to the surface, everything I said before, then that begins the salvation, because then you can do something to counter it. Because once you know that's your reality, and you know it, and the more you're aware of it 24/7, then you look for ways and methods to counter that, ways and methods to not allow its power to take hold of us. Because essentially you're buying into what has been made very popular in the film called The Matrix, into the Matrix, into a program that's designed to make you think you don't have control over your life, to make you think that the surface is more important than the inner. So in Jewish thought, you'll find interesting things. It does not deny that the outer has power over us, and it doesn't even say you have to reject the outer. It says you have to look for the inner and let the inner define the outer instead of the outer defining the inner. I hope that made sense. It wasn't just a play of words. Let me explain that, okay? So in Hebrew, the word for face, or the face of things, or the face of a human being, is called panim. In English, a face means the surface, on the face of it, as you say, which means on the surface level. But panim has another meaning in Hebrew. It also means inside, panim, panimiyut, internal, within. So imagine, in English you don't have that. Face means outer. It doesn't mean inner. But in Hebrew, the same word for face is also the word for within. So we have the concept, for example, echad b'peh, echad b'lev, if you ever heard that expression, that's called duplicity. You say one thing and you mean something else. You put on a smile to someone and you really want to stab them. We have that capacity to be duplicitous. Your face says one thing, and within you're feeling the opposite. Now, some people have mastered the art that you really can deceive you into thinking they're your friend, when they are actually not anything but. So with that said, in Hebrew, however, that concept is obviously repulsive. That's why the word for panim, surface, is the same word for within. It means a seamlessness. What you see is what you get. Children, obviously, comes naturally to them. Children, what you see is what you get. A child's smile is an authentic smile. An adult smile may be, maybe not be. A child's tears are authentic tears. Children don't manipulate until they're taught to manipulate, or they learn by osmosis from their parents, of course, or the educators, or the rest of the world. But naturally, a child is seamless. What you see is what you get. The face is a reflection of what you are. Or to put it in other words, as I mentioned before, you ask people, who are you? They give you their business card. That's what you do. That's not who you are. Most of us, what we do and who we are not the same. Imagine the beauty, imagine the gift of being a person. Who you are is what you do, and what you do is who you are. You know many people like that? Very few. It's not just that you love your work then. It means who you are is what you do. What you express is the real you. In other words, your outer face is expressing the inner you. There's an interesting Jerusalem Talmud Yerushalmi. You may know that there were two academies during the time when the Talmud was being compiled. One academy was in Babylon, and thus yielded Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and there was another academy in Jerusalem called and that yielded the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Jerusalem Talmud was concluded a little earlier than the Babylonian Talmud. Babylon is where today modern-day Iraq is. And there was the yeshivas there, Pumbedisa and so on, along the Euphrates River. Now, the Jerusalem Talmud has an interesting episode with a man called Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was traveling and came to a city. As he entered the city, everyone saw his face was glowing. His face was glowing. So the peasants of the town, the non-Jewish peasants, all began to speculate, why is he so elated? Why is his face so illuminated? And of course, everybody speculated based on what would make them be happy. So one of them said he must have lent money to someone on very high interest, so he made a real killing in that way, taking advantage of someone, so that's why his face is shining. Another one said, no, he must have eaten a very good piece of fresh and juicy pork. Chazer. That's why he's so happy. And another one, there's different versions there, Gersais, but another one, that he must have had a very good sexual experience. That's why his face is so lit up. And they all went over to Rabbi Yehuda and they asked him. I don't know if they took bets on it, but they asked him, so why are you glowing? And he says, because Motzossi Tesefta Chadata. I found a new Tesefta, a new manuscript, a new piece of scholarship. None of them guessed that, because obviously everybody, as they say, Kol HaPoisel B'Mumay Poisel, which means we all project. If we see somebody happy, we probably think they're happy. What would make me happy? That's what would make you happy. But none of them considered that he was a scholar, and what really makes his face shine, Chachmas Adam Teir Panav, the wisdom that he acquired, that's what makes him glow. Now, all the things they said were all temporary pleasures. And yes, it can make you glow for a little while, but not going to last. And Rabbi Yehuda lived a life of a permanent pleasure, something that when you gain knowledge, especially divine knowledge, especially refined knowledge, wisdom that can change your life and change your student's life and change your children's life forever and ever, that is what made him glow. So you see a face, so a face can glow for things that are not necessarily really reflective of who you really are, just what you did. In his case, it was who he is, that's who he was. That's why, as I said, panim in Hebrew means both inner and outer, because that's the ultimate goal, a seamlessness of the two. So the Tzimtzum concept that I described before with the Arizal is essentially means that we are living in darkness. As much as light we generate, whether it's artificial light or sunlight, that's physical light. But knowledge, you can live in a bright world and still live in the dark. If you're not aware, if you're not conscious, you can be part of a program and follow the culture or follow the social institutions and conventions of this world. And you could technically be a daylight, but you could be walking in the dark. And who of us doesn't travel in the dark? Like the roads of our lives, where are they leading us? Where are we going? How many of us have a long-term plan? And they can say, yes, my life, I'm invested in leaving a mark that will have an eternal impact. We are, as I said before, mostly products of day-to-day routines and habits and patterns that control our lives. Doesn't mean it has to be that way. So the idea of the Tzimtzum of the Arizal really teaches us what is driving this world, and teaches us that the world is not shrouded in light, shrouded in darkness. But we can convince ourselves that it's light, which, as I've mentioned a number of times, the Baal Shem Tov's interpretation on Aster Ponai, that there's a darkness and there's a double darkness. There's a darkness that at least is dark. And then there's a darkness that conceals that fact that it's dark. And then you think that darkness is light. So like they say, there are things you don't know. You know that you don't know. But what's far worse is you don't know that you don't know, and you think you know. If you knew that you didn't know, okay, so at least you'll go search for an answer. But if you think you have the answers and you don't, where are you going to go with that? So the idea and recognizing, that's why, ironically and paradoxically, the Arizal's revelation of Tzimtzum, the revelation of the Seder Tzimtzum, the fact that we are shrouded psychologically and spiritually in darkness, actually is the beginning of light, because he's telling us it's dark. Once you know that, that is the first step toward healing. Because it teaches you that what you think is reality is not necessarily reality. The reality that we think is reality, let's face it, is defined by our outer senses. When people ask, knee-jerk reaction, what's real in this room right now? hands down, without you being primed or prepared, you'll say the table, the chairs, the people, the things you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. There's no question about it. Nobody's going to say the reality in this room are the microscopic particles that are pulsating and shaping everything, or the DNA within me. Now that I said it, most of us will now. If you think, of course, when you think about it, of course that's more real, because that's the cause, and this is the effect. But that's how we think. We look at the moment, and we work our way backwards. That's why technology and science is not effortless. It takes work to look for the causes behind the effects, to look for the roots behind the symptoms. We look at symptoms, and I can speak, as we all know, you probably know this rule, that anyone comes to you for advice and they have a problem. I'm not talking about some type of superficial thing. I could say almost hands down that 95% of times the problem people define is not the problem. It's the symptom of the problem. They're telling you, I have pain, whether it's physical pain or psychic pain or psychological pain. Yes, we know you have pain, but that's not the cause, that's the symptom. Someone says, my marriage isn't working. I'm having difficulties at work. I have no issues with self-confidence. These are all symptoms. There's always a root to symptoms. But we are not trained to see roots. Because again, the symptom conceals. We do not see the cause of the effect. That takes a trained eye, it takes experience, and it takes patience to untangle things until you get to the root of the issue. And it's not always easy. That's why, for example, when you think of our childhoods and our adult lives, much of our adult lives is shaped by our childhood. Different things that happen in our childhood. But we cannot turn the clock back. And we may not remember exactly what happened in our childhood. But nevertheless, when you see something is growing this way, you know that something somewhere caused it to grow that way. So we extrapolate. The analogy I often give for this in trying to understand the unconscious is think of a wall shrouded in darkness. And you can't touch the wall and you can't shine a light on it. And you know there's a wall there. There's something there. You think of it like how do we know there are black holes? Nobody can see a black hole because the whole point of a black hole is that the gravitational pull is so powerful. They just confirmed something of that, the gravitational, what they call it, Einstein's prediction. Gravitational wave, right. Waves. Waves. Right. So black holes, so how do we know they're black holes? Since the light can't escape, and without light you can't see something, how do you know there's a black hole? You see its impact on bodies around it. If you see planets or other items moving in strange ways, just like right now, if you saw, let's say I had here a few pieces of metal, and you see them starting to move, you know there must be some force that's causing them to move. And behind the wall there may be a magnet that's so powerful that's causing them to move. So you may not see the magnet, but you see its effect. And from its effect you extrapolate. So let's say you see a dark wall, a wall shrouded in darkness, you can't shine a light and you can't touch it. How can you figure out what the wall looks like? Simple riddle. The answer is you take a rubber ball and you throw it on the wall. You throw it. So you don't see it bounce, you only see how it bounces back. You can't see. So if it bounces back straight, you know the wall is straight. If it bounces back to the right, you know there must be a jagged indentation. That way. If it bounces back to the left, another. You keep bouncing it, and you can get more or less like a sonogram or sonar waves. You don't see them submarine or objects under the water, but when you shoot these powerful waves, you see how they bounce back, so you realize there must be an object there. So the same idea. So when you're talking psychologically to someone, and they share with you whatever issues they have, pain, problems, anxiety, depression, whatever it may be, so you can't go into their unconscious. Nobody can enter the unconscious in any conscious way. That's obviously a contradiction of terms. But you can bounce a ball off of it. It would be the equivalent, let's say, of a doctor. So you say, I have some pain in my arm. The doctor starts touching the arm. Tell me where it hurts. Here. And you start saying, here it really hurts. The nerve is raw. So the doctor may not touch the nerve, but by doing that and trained enough, understands that that's where it hurts. So when you talk to somebody, you start saying, okay, let's discuss your mother. And they say, no, it's not my mother. My mother has nothing to do with it. Let's move on. The more they say that, the more you know they don't want you to go there. And they may not even know it, but that's exactly where the problem is. You always go where the person resists. Now, obviously, we're not talking about a full assault on someone's psyche, but we do not like to go where it's uncomfortable. So when if you're a professional and you have a discussion with someone, you can identify a lot of the issues, not because you see them, but you could see how the person reacts. So it's like bouncing that ball on their psyche or their unconscious psyche, and you see how it bounces back. And you see reactions. Like you say, if you see somebody suddenly, you share with them something, and their body tightens up. That's very clear why. There's something that you spoke about, some topic that's disturbing them. The point I'm making here is that we do not see the invisible, but we can identify it through proper observation, study, examination. And you have to always be careful not to make a mistake, so that's why it's not so simple. What does this lead us all back to? The fact is that the awareness of the life which we live in a shrouded, dark world. And never think otherwise. Just because they call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages, and therefore our ages is the Light Age, that doesn't mean we're healthier. It simply means we have more technology. We have more machines. Yes, we know more. But as our good old friend Oscar Wilde would say, that people today know more and more about less and less. You could look at it that way. Or another way of putting it is that it's not that today people are more literate than they were then. Today, illiterate people know how to read, which means literacy isn't information. I'm not no Oscar Wilde fan, but he has some good quotes, where he says, what is the other one? That people who know the price of everything but the value of nothing. So what does that mean? That means, yes, we know we have more facts today. We have more information. You press a button. But don't convince yourself just because there's a Dr. Google available and ask any question that you're a more intelligent person. It just simply means we have access to information quicker. Intelligence is not data and not information. Intelligence is emotional intelligence. Intelligence is how you process information. And that cannot be taught quickly. That comes through experience, through sensitivity, and there are no shortcuts there. There are no shortcuts. In a way, our world can be even darker because we can convince ourselves, because we have so much access to power and to information, we can convince ourselves that we're more evolved than any generation past. But I think any intelligent person knows that if you want a real test, a litmus test of our evolution is look at our relationships. Look at our romantic relationships, at our emotional relationships, at the state, the quality of our families and our children. And you'll find out very quickly that technology has not done anything in that regard. If anything, it's probably detrimental in certain ways because it creates very good distractions. When's the last time you had a conversation with someone eye to eye for more than 10 minutes without checking your texts? And I'm not here it's not a type of fire and brimstone attack on technology, obviously. It's just we have to call a spade a spade. Technology is a power. It's a great tool chest. But don't think a tool chest is life. A tool chest is simply, as they always say, junk in, junk out, garbage in, garbage out. Good tools, if you put good things in there, it'll speed it up and you're great. If you put bad stuff in there, it'll speed up the nonsense, the junk. So to bring it back to our discussion here, what is sobering and very critical in life is to be brutal about this with ourselves. The psychological, emotional status of a human being is not changed at all by the modern age. We should never think that way. We are living the same darkness that people have always lived because there's a symptom that affects us all. And we have to always recognize that we are trapped in a way and can be trapped and we're subjugated to the superficial outer surface of things. And we do value a glove more than a hand, as odd as it is. But as soon as you become aware of that, that begins your healing. Because then you can work on it. Then you can say, okay, how do I then counter the forces that seduce me so often and tempt me and trap me in their moment and recognize that I want something more eternal in my life? That's the question. That has to be the operative question. And when a person thinks in those terms and you're aware of it, that is the first way you stop the darkness from controlling your life. Because you recognize that's a powerful force and I have to do something to counter it. Essentially, to put it in simple terms, this is what the whole Torah and Judaism comes to do. It's a wake-up call. It's like an alarm clock to wake you up to deeper spiritual realities that are there all the time and not allow yourself to be distracted or seduced by all these temporary temptations. And I'm not suggesting we can just automatically change it and suddenly everything changes. So that's why it's a step-by-step process. And it comes down to understanding that you have the opportunity, you have the choice to make in every action you do. Is it going to be a short-lived, temporary action, or is it going to have some permanent impact? And that's where it gets really fascinating. That's not just about choosing eternity over the short or over the transient, but it's actually that you can turn even the transient into the eternal. And I'll give you many examples of that. But it all comes with that condition that you're aware that we're trapped by it, by the here and now, and you're doing everything possible to expose a deeper spiritual dimension which introduces eternity even in your temporary activities. So if you want the formula, it works like this. Everything that's made of matter or materialism dies. Anything that's made of spirituality lives forever. It's as simple as that. So if you can infuse and spiritualize your material life, that's how you bring eternity into a temporary condition. And this, as I said, this opportunity is not only on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or on some moment of high inspiration, every moment of our lives. Because we have the concept of what we call God leads the footsteps of a human being. Divine providence. You meet people. So you can end up talking about the weather, which is a temporary conversation. Not just temporary, it's complete, we all know, it's just a way to not ignore somebody. It's like an elevator. If you don't want to be awkward, you say, hey, the weather, it's going to snow, it's not going to snow, it's warm, it's hot, it's cold. Or you can use the opportunity of talking to someone and say something kind. You're sitting near someone in a commute, you can ignore them, or you can open a conversation. It doesn't mean suddenly you have to go into the most intimate parts of life, but you offer a friendship in a hostile world. You never know how you can change a person's life, yours and that person. It's like looking for everywhere you go for spiritual opportunities. What the Kabbalists call it is redeeming the sparks. That we all have sparks that were allocated in our lives. And they're everywhere. They're in your workplace, they're the places you walk, where you travel, where you live, where you sleep, where you everything. Everywhere there are sparks. What you eat. You can eat a piece of food because you're hungry. Okay. The energy will last a little while, then you get hungry again. You eat another piece of food. Complete temporary. Or you make a blessing on the food. And you concentrate that you're redeeming a spark. You're elevating the spark. And you're using the energy of the food to go do a mitzvah to help another person. Then you and the food and the energy are forever changed the world because you've helped somebody with that energy. Instead of just taking the energy and indulging in it and doing something selfish or even hurtful. So these small little things, they all sound little small things, but each one of them is an eternal dimension that you can infuse in anything you do. Even in the most casual, superficial conversation can become meaningful. I'll give you another example I've shared a number of times. I remember traveling once for Shabbaton for a weekend to East Hampton. So I was there to go to speak for a weekend. I stopped around 2/3 of the way there, place I forgot where it was, to fill up my car with gas. So the gas station was right near a club. Near the club, there was a guy, a parking attendant, parking cars. He comes over to me, asks me if I'm staying for the party. I'll park my car. So I said, not this party, I'm going to another party, a Shabbos party. See, it piqued his interest, and he said to me, what do you do? Like, what's your... So I said, I teach, I write. What do you write about? I write psycho-spiritual stuff. And he asked me if I have an email list. I said, yeah. He says, put me on your email list. And that was that. So I went on to my journey, came back to New York, and he started getting the emails, as many others did, every Friday, Thursday night. This was at least 10 years ago, around 3 years ago, 7 years later, from when it happened, I get an email from him. I hadn't forgotten the story, but I never thought I'd hear from him again. An email. What's his email? He says, you probably don't remember me, but I was the guy parking cars there in that town, hick town, and you probably didn't realize that I happen to be Jewish. And he writes to me that he grew up completely secular. As a matter of fact, his parents, unfortunately, were killed in a car accident. So he was thrown around from one family to the next, in the homes. a difficult life, let's put it that way. And he says, but I want to say something to you, that since you started sending me these emails, I live with them. This is my Judaism. This has become my Jewish education. He says, so every Shabbos, he starts writing, Bereshis, I live with Bereshis, Chanukah, Purim. He writes out Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. I pray with these emails. I study them. This has become my spiritual connection. I wanted you to share. I wanted you to know that. I have the emails still. I was obviously very moved by that. And I realized right there an example of what I'm saying here. You know, ever since I've become this junkie, I harvest email addresses. You know, everywhere I go, I get people's email because of this story. Simple email. The likelihood that he would come to New York to class here, very unlikely. But technology opened up the opportunity that with press of a button, free, he's getting these things, and who knows how it changes his life. So a temporary interaction that I had with him that could have meant nothing. He just asked me to park a car, and we would have moved on. I never would have heard from him again. Turned into something because his request and I sending, and something, a small, who of us cannot send a nice email to people? So my suggestion to you, for every email you send for entertaining purposes or personal or just nonsense, maybe send a meaningful email, a nice thought that you have, or share something that someone else passed on to you. It doesn't cost any money, and you're turning your email inbox or outbox into a vehicle of eternity, because you can change a person's life with it. Will you, for short change? That's not the point. The point is that if you share something that's more than just superficial, this is how we counter and pierce the symptom that the result. That's how you change darkness into light. Not suddenly ignoring it, but recognizing that we can be very much trapped in the moment. And you know what? You don't let your life be controlled by moments. You turn moments into eternity. Every moment can be turned into something eternal. And that's completely in our hands. Now, when you start doing this on an ongoing basis, you start seeing your whole life begins to be filled with such moments. Initially, I would say start slow. It has to become something you have to train yourself to think that way. And that's a very big different way of living a life. The Jewish people as a people in general were this way. That's why we're here today. Why we're the great empires? What happened to them all? Everyone disappeared because they all lived in the moment. And as soon as the moment was over, the moment in the sun, the great Roman Empire, they all fell in their own swords. They all fell in their own arrogance. Whereas if you live your life not just for the moment, for today, but you live for tomorrow, you pass it on to your children. And there's a legacy. And every action is going to have a reaction. And actions breed and bear fruit and so on. And you think that way, that's how eternity is created. It's as simple as that. So why doesn't everybody in the world know that? Because the symptom keeps us trapped to think that all it is the now. Our minds understand it, but we don't really ultimately live by it. That's the challenge. So again, this is not necessarily a whole change of a way of thinking. It's beginning step by step and just making sure that temporary moments and the here and now does not remain something that's just temporary. I've seen people who never would allow a moment to just be a moment. Every moment was filled with something that would have some perpetuity, something that would last. Now, that's why it's called Avram Zaken Ba Bayamim. There's a verse that says Abraham aged, and he came into his days. And the question is asked, once you say he's aged, what is the redundancy he came into his days? So the Zohar says, you can be aged, but not your days have not been filled, because your days die. That yesterday is gone, tomorrow is not here yet. But Abraham, every moment he filled, so he wasn't just age, his days were filled with permanence. That's why we could sit here today, almost 3,800 years later, and talk about him. Why? Because what he left, his legacy, lives on today, just as it was then. He did not live for the moment. Now, this doesn't mean we don't have moments, and it doesn't mean that we do not have an outer life. It just means the outer is simply that. It's the outer shell of an inner experience. Or as, how do they put it? They say, it's not we're physical people having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual people having a physical experience. It's a very different way to look at your life. Now, we've not been trained this way. We've been trained to think very much survival, take care of myself because no one else will. We are survivors. We are survival of the fittest. And we see life, dog eats dog. It's a hostile world. And even if we ourselves are fundamentally not selfish, we see everyone else as selfish, it makes us more selfish. Becomes this type of contagious, toxic air. But, as we always say, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And part of the solution means that you change the course of things. You change the course of turning the arrow instead of me, take, is give. It's not just about me. It's about changing something. It's about influencing. It's about making an impact, and a positive one. And we all have that power to do that. I mean, you can't imagine how many maladies, how many psychological fears and anxieties and concerns would be resolved if you were on the offense and not on the defense. Because that's the best defense is offense. Offense means that you control your moments. When you interact with someone, no matter what they do, you can always turn it into something positive. This doesn't mean there aren't obnoxious people out there. It doesn't mean you have to interact with every obnoxious person. But it means that you can turn temporary and short-term experiences into something that is forever. And let me ask you, let's all be honest. If someone meets you and says, you told me something 5 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. It's changed my life, or it's helped me get through. Is there a bigger compliment than you can hear than that? That's the things that make us really more than human. The ability to have that type of impact on people. And I don't want to ask the other side question to you. Are there people in this world that can say that about you? Even if the answer is right now no, but that can change. You can change that. It's all about your attitude. But we live so much on the defense because either we've been hurt or we're afraid of being hurt. And there's fears and insecurities that drive us. And let's be honest, most of us, our minds, our hearts are occupied with a lot of negative stuff. Fighting demons, fighting challenges, fighting temptations, and so on. And guilt, shame, and all the stuff that comes with it. So our whole real estate is occupied by foreign forces, alien forces. The way you change that is don't go to war with these aliens. Instead, bring in something positive. Do something that you could say at the end of the day, I said something today, I did something today that had an impact, that had something that's more than temporary. And not in an arrogant way, just as a service in a way, like knowing that that's what we are here to do. And the more you're able to do that, the more confidence you build, because you say you could have an impact. You could have that type of positive influence. So the first step is being aware that we don't have many eternal things going on in our lives. Let's be honest. Simply not because we're bad people, because by default we become controlled by the habits of life. And we're just going for the flow. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. I mean, look how many parents, for example, choose career over their children with the excuse that the career is giving security to their children. But your children is your eternity and your career is your temporary. It's just another example. That doesn't mean career can't be turned into eternity if you see it as a means, not as an end in itself. Anyway, I can go on and on and on. You're all a very intelligent group out there too. I'm sure everybody could take this and turn it into something more. And God bless us all to be able to discover those inner talents that we have, what we can contribute, not just what we take, but what we can give. And yes, to turn our temporary, our transient, our temporal, whatever, all all the synonyms that we have, to turn them into something immortal, eternal, perpetual, forever. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll have a very blessed week. And I know that some people came last week to the class here, but we send out a weekly email. That last week I was away, so we send out an email. I only did it online. So please give us your email addresses so you could be up to date if there's a change of scheduling. I want to make sure nobody comes when there's no class here on location. Next week, right now, the plan is there will be a class, as we've been doing every Wednesday, but regardless...
Is that firm Catan?
Next week?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Today's Ches, yeah.
Say something about that next week?
I hope so. And everyone have a very blessed week. And if any... Afterwards, I'll take afterwards. 1 second. Let me just... And if anyway, we could be of help. I could be of help to you in your journey. That's what I've dedicated my life, is trying to turn these moments into something eternal. And so feel free to reach out and be in touch. So Thank you very much. Be well.